tabooed personage must be carefully prevented from touching the ground. In electrical language, he must be insulated. If he is not to be emptied of the precious substance or fluid with which he, as a vial, is filled to the brim. And in many cases, apparently the insulation of the tabooed person is recommended as a precaution not merely for his own sake, but for the sake of others. For since the virtue of holiness or taboo is, so to say, a powerful explosive which the smallest touch may detonate, it is necessary in the interest of the general safety to keep it within narrow bounds, lest breaking out it should blast, blight, and destroy whatever it comes into contact with. Section 2. Not to see the sun. The second rule to be noted is that the sun may not shine upon the divine person. This rule was observed both by the Mikado and by the pontiffs of the Zapotecs. The latter "was looked upon as a god whom the earth was not worthy to hold, nor the sun to shine upon." The Japanese would not allow that the Mikado should expose his sacred person to the open air, and the sun was not thought worthy to shine on his head. The Indians of Grenada in South America "kept those who were to be rulers or commanders, whether men or women, locked up for several years when they were children, some of them 7 years, and this so close that they were not to see the sun, for if they should happen to see it, they forfeited their lordship, eating certain sorts of food appointed, and those who were their keepers at certain times went into their retreat or prison and scourged them severely." Thus, for example, the heir to the throne of Bogota, who was not the son but the sister's son of the king, had to undergo a rigorous training from his infancy. He lived in complete retirement in a temple, where he might not see the sun, nor eat salt, nor converse with a woman. He was surrounded by guards who observed his conduct and noted all his actions. If he broke a single one of the rules laid down for him, he was deemed infamous and forfeited all his rights to the throne. So, too, the heir to the kingdom of Sogamoso, before succeeding to the crown, had to fast for 7 years in the temple, being shut up in the dark and not allowed to see the sun or light. The prince who was to become Inca of Peru had to fast for a month without seeing light. Section 3. The seclusion of girls at puberty. Now it is remarkable that the foregoing 2 rules, not to touch the ground and not to see the sun, are observed either separately or conjointly by girls at puberty in many parts of the world. Thus, amongst the negroes of Loango girls at puberty are confined in separate huts, and they may not touch the ground with any part of their bare body. Among the Zulus and kindred tribes of South Africa, when the first signs of puberty show themselves, "while a girl is walking, gathering wood, or working in the field, she runs to the river and hides herself among the reeds for a day so as not to be seen by men. She covers her head carefully with her blanket, that the sun may not shine on it and shrivel her up into a withered skeleton, as would result from exposure to the sun's beams. After dark she returns to her home and is secluded," in a hut for some time. With the Awakonde, a tribe at the northern end of Lake Nyassa, it is a rule that after her first menstruation a girl must be kept apart, with a few companions of her own sex, in a darkened house. The floor is covered with dry banana leaves, but no fire may be lit in the house, which is called the house of the Awasungu, that is, of the maidens who have no hearts. In New Ireland, girls are confined for 4 or 5 years in small cages, being kept in the dark and not allowed to set foot on the ground. The custom has been thus described by an eyewitness. "I heard from a teacher about some strange custom connected with some of the young girls here, so I asked the chief to take me to the house where they were. The house was about 25 feet in length, and stood in a reed and bamboo enclosure, across the entrance to which a bundle of dried grass was suspended to show that it was strictly taboo. Inside the house were 3 conical structures about 7 or 8 feet in height, and about 10 or 12 feet in circumference at the bottom, and for about 4 feet from the ground, at which point they tapered off to a point at the top. These cages were made of the broad leaves of the pandanus tree, sewn quite close together so that no light and little or no air could enter. On one side of each is an opening, which is closed by a double door of plaited cocoanut tree and pandanus tree leaves. About 3 feet from the ground there is a stage of bamboos which forms the floor. In each of these cages we were told there was a young woman confined, each of whom had to remain for at least 4 or 5 years without ever being allowed to go outside the house. I could scarcely credit the story when I heard it. The whole thing seemed too horrible to be true. I spoke to the chief and told him that I wished to see the inside of the cages, and also to see the girls, that I might make them a present of a few beads. He told me that it was taboo, forbidden for any men but their own relations to look at them. But I suppose the promised beads acted as an inducement, and so he sent away for some old lady who had charge, and who alone is allowed to open the doors. While we were waiting, we could hear the girls talking to the chief in a querulous way, as if objecting to something or expressing their fears. An old woman came at length, and certainly she did not seem a very pleasant jailer or guardian, nor did she seem to favour the request of the chief to allow us to see the girls, as she regarded us with anything but pleasant looks. However, she had to undo the door when the chief told her to do so, and then the girls peeped out at us, and when told to do so, they held out their hands for the beads. I, however, purposely sat at some distance away and merely held out the beads to them, as I wished to draw them quite outside that I might inspect the inside of the cages. This desire of mine gave rise to another difficulty, as these girls were not allowed to put their feet to the ground all the time they were confined in these places. However, they wished to get the beads, and so the old lady had to go outside and collect a lot of pieces of wood and bamboo, which she placed on the ground, and then going to one of the girls, she helped her down and held her hand as she stepped from one piece of wood to another until she came near enough to get the beads I held out to her. I then went to inspect the inside of the cage out of which she had come, but could scarcely put my head inside of it, the atmosphere was so hot and stifling. It was clean, and contained nothing but a few short lengths of bamboo for holding water. There was only room for the girl to sit or lie down in a crouched position on the bamboo platform, and when the doors are shut it must be nearly or quite dark inside. The girls are never allowed to come out, except once a day to bathe in a dish or wooden bowl placed close to each cage. They say that they perspire profusely. They are placed in these stifling cages when quite young, and must remain there until they are young women, when they are taken out and have each a great marriage feast provided for them. One of them was about 14 or 15 years old, and the chief told us that she had been there for 5 years, but would soon be taken out now. The other 2 were about 8 and 10 years old, and they have to stay there for several years longer. Close quote. In Kabadi, a district of British New Guinea, quote, daughters of chiefs, when they are about 12 or 13 years of age, are kept indoors for 2 or 3 years, never being allowed under any pretence to descend from the house, and the house is so shaded that the sun cannot shine on them. Close quote. Among the Yabim and Bukawa, 2 neighbouring and kindred tribes on the coast of northern New Guinea, a girl at puberty is secluded for some 5 or 6 weeks in an inner part of the house, but she may not sit on the floor lest her uncleanliness should cleave to it.